Welcome to the Education and Empowerment Podcast. In this show, our hosts explore success and advancement through education by interviewing today's top leaders in the fields of education, business, and technology in order to provide insight into what it really takes to succeed. This show is brought to you by ForStay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. ForStay provides turnkey, all-in-one cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.forstay.com and landlords.forstay.com. All right, let's get into the show.
Welcome to Education and Empowerment Podcast. In this episode, we are bringing Dr. Myron Pope. Dr. Myron Pope is a visionary and collaborative leader who has over 25 years of work experience serving as a higher education administrator and educator. In his most recent role as the Vice President of Student Life at the University of Alabama, he focused on enrollment and retention strategies, student support and advocacy, the promotion of student involvement, diversity and inclusion programming, fraternity, sorority life, and the creation of co-curricular learning experiences. In our podcast episode, we will expand this topic of improving student lives, not only enrollment numbers.
Good morning and welcome to Education and Empowerment Podcast. This morning we have a pleasure of welcoming Dr. Myron Pope, who will inspire us on various topics in regards to student housing. Dr. Myron Pope, welcome to our show.
Thank you so very much, Bob. I'm really excited about the opportunity, and it's been great learning a lot about you and all the great things that you're doing for students. And ForStay is doing some phenomenal things. I'm glad to have an opportunity to talk to you about a little bit about me and my work.
Amazing. We're definitely thrilled and excited to have you on our podcast. The background that you're bringing in student affairs is certainly very unique and sets a very good unfair advantage, so to speak. And these experiences that you are bringing are extremely useful to our today's conversation. So I'm excited to talk to you today. We want to get our conversation by learning. Is there a quote or a motto that you live by? What wakes you up in the morning?
There are a variety of things. I've read so much through the years. I've had so many great mentors, but one of the things that always stands out to me is one that I've heard over and over and over again, seen in various forms, and it is education is the great equalizer. Again, I feel like I have been placed in higher education or in close proximity to higher education through my work with government and nonprofits, and just created opportunities for people to access, afford, and complete their education, either K through 12 or higher education. And, people who are able to go through, complete their bachelor's degree, and in many cases, professional and graduate degrees, it changes their lives in so many ways. It puts them on a completely different trajectory overall. It provides them to access from a socioeconomic perspective that they weren't able to achieve previously, especially for those who are coming from low-income backgrounds, minoritized backgrounds. So that's the thing that I am always thinking about. How can I make the world better? How can I leave the woodpile a little bit higher? And certainly in the context of education has been something that I've lived by for quite some time.
Amazing. Well, that definitely, is something that, on a day-to-day basis, we have to ask ourselves, what value am I bringing to the society? And, how could this actually be useful for, everybody surrounding me? I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on, what was that story or an experience that, led you into higher education, so to speak? What inspired you, or was there a story that made you think about this? So tell us about your journey into higher education.
It's a very interesting one in that, like many of my colleagues, many of the people that you probably know, we weren't thinking about jobs in higher education. We met someone along the way and we kind of went this direction. My mom was a first generation student, and she was an educator at the K through 12 level. And she really wanted me to teach at that level. And it was not something I was interested in. Initially, I was thinking about going to law school. I completed my bachelor's and master's, and along the way, someone said, "Hey, you need to look at this really neat program, the Higher Education Administration program." I said, "What in the world is that?" And so I went over to talk to the advisor in the program, and he explained it to me, and I was like, people get degrees to do that. So,
Oh, wow.
I went into the program. I started the program when I was 21 years old, completed my undergrad in the early 90s, started the program immediately after completing my undergraduate degree. And I had many people who were much older in the program. It's master's doctoral classes combined in many cases, and people who were in their 30s, 40s, they had been in the profession for quite some time, who they were working on their doctorates. So I learned quite a bit in terms of theory, but being in the classroom, listening to their experiences, there were case studies all the time.
Right.
And from that, I realized the impact that I could have in terms of making a difference in people's lives. And, I received the graduate assistantship. I had a great advisor during that period of time, Dr. Michael Miller, who was my dissertation chair. And then from there, I had Dr. Ross Palmer, who was my supervisor as a grad assistant. Between the two of them, they opened my eyes, as well as my experiences in those classes, to so many opportunities in the field of higher education. And I realized that this is something I really want to do. It was something that I gained a quick passion for, and it's been a vast majority of what I've done over the last 30 plus years. So I knew it was a place for me just because of those experiences and those folks who mentored me along the way.
That's very empowering. One of the things that really stand out is, we use the collective or the accumulation of these experiences to continue to impact, our stakeholders, and you're doing a great job of that with, your, Myron Pope and Associates. I was wondering if, for the purposes of our audience, you could elaborate about, what you do with that and what kind of, consulting work you provide. Tell us more about what you do.
Many years ago, a good friend of mine, a mentor, asked me about going along with him on a consulting trip. He said, I had someone who backed out on me at the last minute. He said, I think you'll do a pretty good job with this in terms of going with me on this opportunity, and I'll also give you a different perspective. And sure enough, I went along with him, and it was to an HBCU, and we went there and we had a chance to evaluate one of their Title III grants. And, at that point in time, again, I was very young, very, very new to the profession. I had a lot of theoretical knowledge, but not a lot of practical knowledge. Mm-hmm. But that kind of opened my eyes to the opportunities to help, others to grow and develop in ways that, especially when they didn't have that expertise on their campus. Right. So through the years, I've been doing a lot of consulting. Most of my consulting has been in higher education, everything from working with boards in terms of how to function, how those boards should function, to, working on student development, processing, what student success overall, looking at the pipeline as students come in through the recruitment process all the way through to graduation. And many of the things that I have applied in terms of my day-to-day work, I've been able to guide my peers, my colleagues in the field through these consulting opportunities. And so, I've also had a chance to do a lot of this work in the business world, and working with some corporations through some executive coaching. And one of the areas that is really blossoming there is in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our students are going out into a very global world. And they've got to be able to understand, they have to have experiences that are going to prepare them for that. And, I always, people used to say, well, students have to be college ready. No, we have got to be ready as institutions of higher education for these students, bringing them in, providing them with the resources and the support that they need to be successful, while at the same time make sure that they have learning experiences that are going to help them to grow out and be ethical, engaged, informed decisions who are going to be not only great in the workplace, but also great citizens. Going out into a diverse world and understanding the concept of DEI, DEIB in some cases, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's something that we've got to prepare our students to do. And that's what it's going to take for them to be successful. So in my consulting work right now, I'm picking up on many opportunities where business and industry is really interested in finding out ways to help their workforce to engage and be prepared and create an overall environment where DEIB is embraced. And so I'm really excited about that work.
That's fantastic. You mentioned on, DEI and how students are now kind of, entering this global workforce, so to speak. And when you look at, who impacts, this work and who impacts, education of these people, these are obviously the student affairs professionals. What do you find to be the most important aspect for, these emerging student affairs professionals? I mean, throw yourself back in like 30 years, it was different. right now is different. Like, are we doing enough? Like, when it comes to student success, I mean, what is that ingredient that's important for these emerging professionals who are going into like student affairs?
The other thing I have said repeatedly to the teams I've worked with is we have got to demonstrate our value. We've got to help people understand what the profession of student affairs is all about.
Right.
And any given week, students have 150 plus hours of life.
Right.
What's happening during that time? Again, they should be inside the classroom 12 to 15 hours, maybe 18 hours of that week. But tell me about the other 140 hours.
Right.
Who's engaging with those students? Who's creating an environment for those students to continue to learn and grow and develop? And what's happening is, I have one daughter I've got one in college right now, and I've got a daughter who's going to college this fall. And I've got one other, I've got an 11-year-old, but, with those two older kids, I feel like I've done a lot in terms of providing them with what they need to be successful in life. But, there's still a lot that they have to learn. And as I've thought about, through the years, the work that I do, it's taking these young people out of their households. Yes, there are going to be some values, beliefs, mores that they bring to campus, and we want them to embrace those, while at the same time opening up their minds to so much more. What can we do in terms of creating environments to help students to better understand who they are, develop their identity? That's what student affairs does. We'll provide them with those opportunities. Likewise, in many cases, during the time I was at the University of Central Oklahoma, what we found was that African-American male students were performing at a lower first to second year retention, 6-year graduation rates than their peers. And what we discovered is that those students were coming in with the same level of, pre-college characteristics, ACT, high school GPA. And so why weren't they successful at the same level as their peers? Mm-hmm. And so what we discovered is that these students were, there are some things that about their experience, who they were as an African-American male. I can certainly relate to this. I didn't want to ask for assistance as a man. Hey, we got this figured all out, right?
Right.
To ask for assistance demonstrates weakness. In some ways, it will be perceived as weakness, when in actuality, they had a great network there that they had in front of them, but they weren't taking advantage of it. So we created this program called the Black Male Initiative. And what it did was it helped these students to understand that masculinity is great, but we need you to overcome that. We need you to ask for assistance, because that assistance is going to help you to be successful long term. And we saw the needle move in terms of that type of programming. And that's just a snapshot of what Student Affairs does. It's creating those environments to help students from all backgrounds to be successful. It's creating environments to help students grow and learn and develop. Because again, it's great that a student may walk out with that piece of paper in hand, said that they have a bachelor's degree in accounting, engineering, whatever it may be. But business and industry are looking for students who are leaders, individuals who know who they are, individuals who embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. All those things are things that happen outside the classroom, and that's what Student Affairs does.
Amazing. Amazing. You're absolutely right, Mr. Myron. And I was, looking at some of these conversations that we have been having recently, and a lot of emphasis, that I'm kind of, getting and reading now is about the numbers. A lot of the higher education institutions are like, oh, how can we increase our numbers? And, instead of talking about, quality, and retention, everyone is obsessed, with numbers, which I understand. You need numbers to grow and sustain your institution. And, you have to have, specific ratios and such. What would you say is that cool ingredient that can help turn these conversations from numbers to quality, like you are presenting?
Yes. It's interesting that you say that, because some of my consulting work has focused on, again, the enrollment management funnel. And so oftentimes I see institutions that do a really good job of bringing students in, but they don't keep them. And, the national average in terms of retention first to second year is about 68%. And, it's 68%, it's not 42%, but certainly there's a lot of opportunity for institutions to improve on that. And as our student body, as the students who are coming in, not only domestically, but internationally, I know they do a phenomenal job there. I tell people we have to play the hand that we have been dealt.
Right.
If we say that a student is admissible to this institution, we've got to make sure that we create an environment again that is conducive to them being able to be successful while they're here at our institution. And so oftentimes, we spend a lot of money going out recruiting these students. They're qualified, but for whatever reason, we continue to have challenges in terms of retention. Why aren't they being retained? What groups are not being retained? And, where are we doing these checkpoints to really figure out why they are not successful? I've had some conversations with some peers recently, some people who are working in various industries, especially the tech firms. And it's amazing how much data they are utilizing and really assessing their customer experience. And, we have a lot of data in higher education. And I would say that we probably need to leverage it a little bit better in terms of telling the story of what's truly happening with students. And there's some really good examples out there that I've seen over the last few months with the tech firms, the Amazons and Microsofts, et cetera, and their level of engagement with people and satisfaction and how they're leveraging that data to truly impact the customer experience. And that's something that we've got to do a better job of in terms of leveraging data and not just collecting data for the sake of collecting it, but truly using it to tell the story of why our students are not staying and why they're not successful. That's the future of what we've got to do to not only help students to get to campus, but to keep them on campus and help them to graduate.
Perfect. I have a follow-up question, I guess, to help kind of like clarify these, like what role would you say the background and, ethnicity of a student play in their success? And are there any methods that you have noticed or that, like best practices do you think that are out there to close the gap, so to speak, like when it comes to like enrollment management? Tell us best practices that, you're aware of.
You bring in 2,600 students per year, as we were doing at the University of Central Oklahoma. Here, during my time at the University of Alabama, we were bringing in 7,000 to 8,000 students per year. And that's a lot. And, to individualize that experience for every single student is very difficult. But there are some things that really stand out.
Right.
During our time at the University of Alabama, of what we discovered, again, just through looking at the data, looking at student success gaps, who's successful and who's not. There's some things that really jumped out. Students who are Pell recipients, we discovered that there were some financial gaps there. And so it's really looking at the data and trying to glean from a big picture perspective, those places where you see some gaps, some gaps in student success. And it's easier said than done. And again, that's one of those areas where higher education is coming along. And for many young professionals, it's great that you're interested in student affairs. But, if you can get into fundraising as well as into, institutional research and effectiveness, that's the place to be right now, because we've got to have that data to guide our practice. We've got to become more data-informed institutions. And so some institutions are data-driven, data-informed institutions, and so oftentimes there is not a silver bullet per se, and there are going to be students from different perspectives. You got the kid like me, African-American kid from a small town in Southwest Alabama, went off to the University of Alabama as a student. Then you got the kid who came from Birmingham, a much more affluent community, a school district, who, African-American also. So we may look alike, but there are differences in terms of our preparation. And how do we, better understand and take those students who have those differences and characteristics, pre-college characteristics, and then from there through their experience, understand who they are and how to best serve them. Again, how can we become more student ready as colleges and universities to help those students to be successful?
That's awesome. That's awesome. So in your work right now with your company, what leaders are doing now to kind of help close that, equity gap? Like, have you noticed anything else that, stands out? Like when you're talking to these like leaders, I'm sure, you do a lot of like strategic planning and assessments and evaluations and consult them on best practices. Is there one or two things that you want to mention?
Yes, I think that, again, there is no silver bullet. And I think that we all go to many conferences, we hear many sessions, and we can't just extrapolate everything that is said there and take it back to our campuses. It's really taking a deep dive and really looking at who we are, who your organization is, what you have going on, and really diving into your data to tell that story. And I think that, for many institutions that it's not always the preparation gap. Students are academically prepared, but it's the environment that these students are coming into
Right.
that is pretty much where they're experiencing those gaps. What is it that we need to do to help them to adapt to the environment they're coming into? What do we need to do in terms of making sure that we fill gaps, financial gaps? Because again, we know higher education is becoming more and more expensive, and that tends to be the bigger challenge for many students. Is that we have concerns about, certainly with student loan debt on the backside, but
Right.
for many students, they are hesitant about taking out student loans, as they should be. For many of them, they're not taking out student loans, and consequently, they're leaving in higher education. So, it's really diving into the data, doing that deep dive, and really trying to drill down and find out where those success gaps, those equity gaps exist. And you make a very good point. It's an equity gap, and sometimes it's not a one size fits all in terms of where you need to go. But the data will truly tell the story, and that's something that I found in my work, full-time work in higher education, and it's something that I'm finding certainly with consulting.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, as they always say, there's no, cookie cutter to these types of situations, and you have to really be creative and dive in, as you said, to, unlock the stories and unlock this data to help, navigate for the future. And as we kind of started beginning to speak about the future, looking ahead, maybe, 1 or 2 or even like 3 years ahead, what would you advise to young professionals who are going into like student affairs profession? What would you say they should pay attention to in order to shift the conversation from, the numbers to more like this quality and the storytelling, and then I guess like some of the customization that, you and I are talking about?
That's correct. The thing that really stands out to me, I went out this morning, went for a walk with a good friend of mine, and he has a daughter who's in college and a son who's getting ready to go off to college. So we were kind of comparing notes with with kids being in the same place, and young people are different. And certainly that with everything that's transpired over the last 2 years with the pandemic and the impact that it's had, mental health is one of the areas that professionals in higher education are really paying attention to. And even more than that, these students are engaging in different ways. Bob, you and I, when we were back in college, we had friends, we had networks, we connected with people. And what we're finding is that, these students at this generation is spending a little bit of time eating and studying, but they're spending a lot of time in this environment with social media, certainly with, in a lot of their engagement overall. This is where they are. And we've got to be able to adjust and adapt to that. We've got to check their mental health state to understand where they are. Again, just with everything that's happened with COVID, we've got to figure out new ways to engage them and really help them to grow and learn and develop. And we might not be able to pull them out of the environment that they're in terms of social media, et cetera. But as student affairs professionals, young professionals, how do we get students to engage, or how do we engage them through new mediums that we haven't leveraged in the past, just to be able to help them to achieve those learning experiences that are going to benefit them long term? So those are areas that I feel are going to be so very critical. I stated earlier, for many young professionals thinking about fundraising piece, because we've got to figure out how to bring more money into higher education, to keep the costs down, to keep the place afloat in terms of facilities and operations. We have so much deferred maintenance, et cetera. And, even for that matter, I think going forward, we've got to realize that it's not only about building new buildings, it's also thinking about how to invest in technology to really, again, reach those students, to create new infrastructures and environments that are going to help students in terms of learning and development. So that, plus the institutional research and effectiveness, getting into that area, those are things that I would certainly encourage young professionals. All those things are things that I would encourage young professionals to think about.
That's amazing. You touched on an extremely important aspect of it, which is technology. As you know, Forstay is a student housing technology company, and we've been connecting students and interns and young professionals with local room providers through technology, and we've seen a great success in reaching almost unreachable destinations, so to speak. And I completely agree with you. I was actually reading an article recently about California's government allocating $5 billion for student housing, and when they did the calculation, they could only accommodate, 21,000 students by creating beds for that, money. So like per student per bed, it's coming to like $214,000 or $240,000 per student per bed. And that kind of challenges me as someone in student housing using technology. Look, I mean, there's existing available supply there that we could reach through technology. Let's allocate part of the money to that. It's interesting that you identify that area. That really sticks out.
So technology is going, again, we've got to meet students where they are.
Exactly.
Plain and simple. And it's great. It would be great if we could just, get them to come down the hall or get them to go across campus to another residence hall, to the student union, to get them together for events and meetings. But that's not their reality. And we've got to leverage iPads. We've got to leverage our, iPhones and, whatever it may be, Samsung, whatever it may be, to use those tools and engaging them to create alternative environments. And that means we've got to invest in those tools. We've got to invest in the infrastructure to make sure that we have better, networking systems on campus, hotspots and other places for students to be able to learn. It's everyone thinks that technology is easy, it's quick, and it's, but sometimes we don't think about the costs. And we don't think about it long term in terms of our strategic planning. And that's another conversation I've been having with some of the folks I've worked with recently is, think about places where you can be strategic in terms of improving the environment to help students to learn and grow and develop. And that's it's what you're doing is phenomenal with Forstay. Higher education certainly got to be at the forefront. States have got to support it. Private institutions have got to think about how to improve their infrastructure from a technological perspective to better serve their students, to meet them where they are.
Absolutely. I really like your take on, meeting the students where they are. And it's kind of, we are wrapping up this, episode, for today. I was curious if you want to leave us with some, words of wisdom or any, parting words, any quote on education or empowerment or any advice that you wanted to leave us with today.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. As professionals in higher education, relevance is so important. And I have an athletic background. I'm very competitive. And I have always said that if you become content, you become stagnant, you get left behind. And we've got to constantly think about ways to stay ahead of our students. That means communicating with them, understanding who they are, and stay committed to helping them to be successful. There are a lot of politics. There's a lot going on right now, a lot of things going on in the world. We can't ignore those realities. Before we came on the podcast, you and I are kind of talking about inflation and the realities of everything that's going on with geopolitical dynamics around the world. We can't ignore those. They are going to impact us. But at the end of the day, we've got to constantly think about ways in which we continue to look forward. Certainly take the time to celebrate those small victories in the moment, recognize those folks who are making those realities possible, but constantly think about how we can stay ahead of the game and continue to be innovative, continue to think about ways in which we can better serve our students and empower them. Because again, as I stated earlier, we're trying to create that next generation of leaders, ethical, engaged citizens who are going to go out and change the world. And you do so much in terms of making that happen, and taking care of yourself and making sure that we continue to stay ahead of the game is what we need to do to continue to move in that direction.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today. I personally learned a lot about, equity, diversity, inclusion, student success, student affairs professionals. And I really hope that this episode will brighten the day of our podcast listeners. And we look forward to staying in touch with you. And, once again, for coming to Education and Empowerment Podcast, sharing your thoughts and insights. This was, truly, truly inspirational. For our podcast listeners who are interested in the work that Forstay does, check us out at about.forstay.com. Check out these great episodes, such as one today on podcast.forstay.com or any of your favorite app. And, also if you're interested in the work that Dr. Myron Pope does, we'll leave his contact information also in our show notes. All right. With that said, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Education and Empowerment Podcast. This show is brought to you by Forstay, a SaaS-enabled online booking marketplace for student and intern housing. Forstay provides turnkey, all-in-one cloud-based accommodation software solutions for colleges, universities, and organizations. Learn more at offcampus.forstay.com and landlords.forstay.com.